These emotions, that's another thing. The ego is bringing us down with these lower levels of thinking. What are they? Well, it says in our book here, resentment is the number one. Do you realize when you think about it, it's all related to people and situations. It's all related to the self. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that was our problem. So we were talking before about having that spiritual awakening, so we can have it right here, right now, when we start to get out of the self. You have to lose the self to find the self and get out of what's called this sorry, sorry, sorry world. So again, I'm getting back to the addiction with the food. It has to do with our need. Well, the food was our solution, right? So what did we do to try to conquer our addiction to food? We used the self. The self never worked because we tried to do it. You see, here's the difference. When you try to diet, you can't do it. But when you have the willingness to let our higher consciousness, which is there all the time. You see, the whole thing is with this higher consciousness. A lot of people try to figure it out, or first coming into meetings and you're saying to yourself, I can't, what is it, somebody in heaven or whatever you want to think it is, and some people have different representations of it, but I started to realize that I was created to be happy, joyous, and free. And the way, again, I always say this, I know that is, look at little children, how happy they are, and look at like a puppy dog, right? Every day is the best day of its life. So when we have this consciousness and change of thinking, we realize that the answer was in here all the time. We just buried it with the self and the defects of character, right? The envy, jealousy, all of these things are the self. That buried all of this happy, joyous, and freedom. So the spiritual awakening comes when we work these steps, because at that point, we're losing the self. It's all about, and it talks about here, actually on page 63, you can hear this a million times, but it says in the big book, it tells us in one sentence, it just takes one sentence in this book to get the understanding of what it's all about. But it talks about that spiritual awakening, for better, selfishness, self-centeredness, that was our problem, for better code of morals. Let me get, so if you have an understanding, comprehension of what it's saying there, let me get that. There we go, I found it here, okay. So it says right before it, it says we were reborn. So that spiritual awakening, and Dr. Silkworth talked about all the scientists with synthetic knowledge couldn't figure it out. The only thing was the spiritual awakening he talked about. So here it is on page, as we felt new power flow in. So all the defects of character, all your self-centeredness, all of the envy, jealousy, pride, it's blocking it out. So in order to let the flow in step 4, when we can, now again, step 4, we recognize our problems, we look at them but don't glare at them. And step 5, they're cast out, 6 and 7, through a higher consciousness. We don't do it. Again, same with, I was going back to the food, and I'll get back to it again with the diets. We can't do it. We can't control it. And I'll get to the solution to that in a minute. It says here, God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and do what thou wilt. So again, with our addiction to whether it's alcohol, drugs, food, or people, it's telling us here, it's the bondage of self. It's the bondage of self. So let me take the food addiction again. I always like going there. So with the food addiction, the bondage is that I'm trying to resist it. Anything we resist gives it more strength. But when I do this, and I said when I get that God consciousness, it's no longer about making food my higher power. I'm no longer interested, I'm interested in natural things. Like I have the natural foods, and I talk about that all the time. Right, when we get centered, the answer is, having natural foods. I have here also an apple, an orange, these things from God's earth. He created them. So the other is man-made, right? So when we get centered, and it's not trying to control it, but when you're centered and you're looking more at the universe and feel the vibration of love and people around you and a nice day outside, that is called spiritual bread. So we start to replace that, and the same we did with our drug and alcohol addiction and people. Again, even with people, why should I worry about whether people like me or not? I can go out and enjoy life and be happy, right? I could be in a meeting with 100 people and sit there and be centered and happy, right? But the interesting thing is when our perception changes in our mind, the whole world surrenders and changes around us anyway. So like somebody says, well, I got to go out and get a job. I got to do this. I got to get people to like me. No, when you get centered, you will intuitively know how to handle things and situations. I have a saying that goes, I don't have to have people like me, but I can be a likable person. So the only way you can be a likable person, the only way you could get over your addictions and be happy, joyous, and free in life is to surrender. Step 1 said we were powerless. Step 2 said we had to be restored to sanity. And step 3 talks about giving our will and our lives over to a higher power. So again, it's a simple program. So when I surrender to the food, surrender to the alcohol, surrender to people, the joy and happiness opens up from here. It's just there all the time. We have a source in us. It's just there. And just right now, the way I could prove it to you is that if right now you stop worrying about everything outside of yourself and didn't make it all about you and your self-pity, self-centeredness. Hey, another thing too is like, I always hear people sometimes will come to me and say, I want to build up my self-esteem. Well, no, it has the word self in it. Isn't it interesting? Your self-esteem says, I want to be better than others. Well, if I only dress better, if I only had a better car, my self-esteem will build. That's, again, you can't do it. I've tried my whole life to build my self-esteem, to make myself feel better, but there's only one answer. When I did these steps and surrendered and made it all about this source, this joy, blissfulness, happiness, and joy inside, everything surrendered to me. The food surrendered, people around me, but the interesting thing is if people around me didn't surrender, it didn't matter to me either, because my happiness came from that inner source. Again, the guy climbs Mount Everest. I mention this every meeting, just for that momentary happiness. All these things, getting people to like us, the food, the alcohol, the addictions, whatever it is, moving geographically, like trying to climb Mount Everest, is pleasure. Pleasure, it lasts a second, but the problem with pleasure is, on the other side of pleasure is misery. Because, right, once you do something, you get some people to like you, then somebody doesn't, you're unhappy, right? So the same with so people are controlling you, life is controlling you. You try to change but again, we could sit right where we are right now and just right now, you could be happy, joyous. You don't need to go any further than here. You don't need to sit down. Again, I say this book has 600 pages. Well, that's great, and I'll tell you, every page is great. And the first part of it, every sentence is just a spiritual awakening for me. But when we started to realize this different consciousness, page 25, and again, there's a reason they call this chapter, There is a Solution. The solution to me, and we were talking about it earlier before the meeting started, was I tried to figure it out. But look, 95% of diets don't work. 99% of the time I try to get people to like me, try to change my situation and do better. It didn't work. And when it did, I still wanted more and more and more. I wasn't happy in what I had. Once we get centered, things start to change. So it says on page 25, in the first paragraph, none of us like the self-searching leveling of our pride, right? Self-centeredness, selfishness, on page 63 it talks about. This was the cause of our problems, filled with self-pity. And it also says in the next paragraph, it says our problems of our own making. That was my spiritual awakening, when I realized where the problem was. I searched and searched, and I never knew where it was. I thought it was you or the outside of me, but it really, the answer is in here. The way out is in. There's another phrase I love. The way out is in. So requires for successful consummation, leveling of the pride, getting out of the self. And the way we do this is through the spiritual awakening, giving our will and our lives over to that source of happiness, getting out of this self-centered envy, jealousy. It's all due to the self, all that misery and depression. If you're depressed now, or during the day when I do get a little bit upset, I know what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about me. It is just such an amazing thing in all religions. It's not just, again, I said not just AA, but all religions. Billions of people believe in religions and throughout the ages because it works. It just really works. It's pretty amazing. I told the story about that debate they had between the atheists and a religious person, and then they were having a debate whether there was a higher power, wasn't a higher power, and the guy came up to the podium and he says, look, since I took in this higher conscience, higher power, he became very religious, became what's called reborn in thinking. He goes, my life has been tremendous and unbelievable. So the guy said to the atheist, he says, look, do you need any more proof than that? What more proof do we need?